Eric, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. It's football season. I don't know what else to say. These are the days that if we were taking phone calls, we would call them the Chicken Little days because the sky is falling, even though the team's 1-0. We're going to be at Fadley's on Friday. The Ravens are still going to be 1-0 on Friday, and the crab cakes are still going to be delicious, and the shrimp salad's going to be great. The fried oysters are going to be great. We're going to be giving away Ravens scratch-offs this Friday from the Maryland Lottery. They present what we're doing along with our new partners at Jiffy Lube, as well as Window Nation, 866-90-NATION, the way to get in touch with our Window Nation folks. It's going to be an injury report kind of week around here. If you're on the WNST Tech Service, brought to you by Coons Baltimore Ford, you will know about it. This guy runs it. This guy does everything. They let him in. They threw me out. You can read all that in my Dear John letters and Dear Steve Bisciotti letters. And I'm sure Eric DeCosta is just waiting to get his. And by the way, Adam Jones is going to get a letter this week too. And it will not resemble the Steve Bisciotti letter. I am not going to hold Adam Jones responsible for anything that Greg Bader or Peter Angelos have done to me. But nonetheless, the Ravens are 1-0. Lucas, how are you? How was your experience on Sunday at the ballpark? A little less wet than maybe we thought, and certainly the outcome of this thing, what you and I talked about, they won by 16 points, great. But boy, this is a body bag game. I called it a Pyrrhic victory out of Baltimore Positive.
Yeah, it really was. And it's interesting to see the lengths that the Ravens and many other teams around the NFL have gone to keep starters out of harm's way in the preseason. I mean, to the point where your starters, most of the Ravens starters didn't play at all in the 3 preseason games. Even, other than guys like John Simpson, who were battling for a starting job, or a guy like Justice Hill, who, as I had said to you before the J.K. Dobbins injury, I thought might be their number 2 running back. But it's amazing after all that effort. And let's face it, there's an impact on that. I think you saw that with a number of teams around the league who didn't play starters in the preseason. There's some rust. And I mean, the Ravens, compared to other teams, they can feel good about their performance overall when you're looking at it through that lens. But trying to avoid the injury bug in the preseason, and the Ravens were able to do that for the most part. Sans Marlon Humphrey and Mark Andrews missing week 1. The injury bug, unfortunately, finds you. As John Harbaugh said in the postgame, it's football. And as we've said on so many occasions, the only way to eliminate injuries from football is probably to eliminate football altogether. But so unfortunate with J.K. Dobbins. And look, we debated so much about his contract, his approach, his hold-in, all those different things. And regardless of how you felt about that one way or the other, to see him being carried into the locker room, and after just a couple hours before that, Nestor, he was the first Ravens player on the field on Sunday morning. You could tell that he was ready to go. You feel for a guy, and certainly for the Ravens, they'll support him in that way. We'll see what's going to happen for his career at this point, and where he's going to be next year, whether it's in Baltimore or somewhere else, probably on a 1-year contract. But in the immediate, in the immediacy of this, the short-term impact of this is the Ravens just lost a lot of upside in the opener. J.K. Dobbins, we've seen, even if it's been too fleeting over the last few years, we've seen what kind of running back he is. And in week 1, as I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, you don't win a Super Bowl in week 1, but you can lose upside that can severely dent those championship aspirations. And it's not just J.K. Dobbins, but it's the Ravens holding their breath on Marcus Williams, who reportedly has a pectoral injury that they're going to hold their breath and see what the MRI looks like. Ronnie Stanley left the game, although he stayed on the sideline. Knee was being iced, but he was standing. He was walking around. Did not look like it was something severe. They would have taken him to the locker room, but doesn't mean he won't miss some time here. And then, throw in Tyler Linderbaum as well, a really tough kid who was in a lot of pain with that ankle. He walked to the sideline, but he went right to the locker room. So, you're hoping that Dobbins is the most severe of these injuries. But boy, after one game, and to your point, this was a game we all expected the Ravens to win, and it was choppy. It was up and down. Certainly, I mean, Odell Beckham even called it a undercooked appetizer, for the passing game. It wasn't Lamar Jackson's best performance by any stretch of the imagination, but they got it done. And that's something the Bengals didn't do, the Steelers didn't do. Just looking in the division, let
The
alone looking
Giants
at some
didn't
other
do it
teams.
either on Sunday night, by
Sure,
the way.
sure.
Gave me a chance to watch the Wham documentary, so I was okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that gives you the proper perspective as far as you're not always going to come out in week one and do what the Ravens did to the Dolphins 4 years ago, right? But they got the win, but boy, it was costly when you look at what they lost on Sunday. And by no means do I think it means their season's over or anything like that. But again, when you're thinking in the big picture, every time you lose a player that can make the impact that a J.K. Dobbins can make, that's upside you're going to have a really tough time finding. Maybe it's Zay Flowers. I mean, as I wrote, he was probably my biggest positive, at least on the offensive side of the ball, easily. But boy, just losing J.K. Dobbins in the fashion they did, you feel for him. But as it pertains to the football team, they have other running backs, but none of those guys are their home run hitter that J.K. Dobbins has shown to be when he's been healthy. But unfortunately, going on 3 years now, that's just not been the case for him.
Well, I mean, his injuries are the lead, right? They were the lead of. They're going to be the lead all week. Then the real story becomes, and I know it's early in the week, so like, all right, Stanley and Linderbaum, we're going to get news on them. You may even have it by the time you hear this later in the afternoon off of MRIs. But thinking they're going to play without them this week, right? I mean, I don't want to be. I mean, one of the two of them, it may be something catastrophic this year, but if for this week playing without those guys, just one game. Let's just look at Cincinnati this week and say if you're going to play without your center and play without your left tackle, both first-round picks, one of them's a made guy, one of them had injury issues, and the offense didn't click all that well against kind of a bad team. I thought the Texans defensively were better than they were offensively for me with a rookie quarterback and all of that. But the competition is going to get stronger across both sides of the ball because the Texans aren't very good. And we'll give both sides of the ball a rub here, but the offensive side, for what they're trying to do in run the ball, now they don't have the running back, and they have other running backs. But pass protection, the things that they need to do, scheming to protect Lamar, all the things they practice. I mean, first off, the center, just the exchange, right, with the center, you don't want to screw with that. Certainly, this kid looked like he was going to the House of Pro Bowl at some point, so he looked like he was on that pathway. If you start missing these guys, and you didn't have guys jumping off this week, you had lots of penalty problems. Penalties really were the lead, maybe even more than the injuries till the injuries happened. But in the case of beating the Bengals without 2/5 of your offensive line, the most devastating thing for me would be Stanley. Well, Linderbaum's not far off, but losing both of them, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, and again, we don't know how serious it is. As I said, Stanley was standing on the sideline for a good bit, and even just had his knee wrapped in ice. If they thought it was a catastrophic injury, they would have taken him to the locker room. I mean, that's just how these things work. But to your point, even if he misses Sunday, even if he misses the next two games, and we know Ronnie Stanley, for all the injuries he's had, you certainly wouldn't say he's been a fast healer in his career. And I'm not saying that as a knock. That's just been the reality. But without him going to Cincinnati, knowing that they have Trey Hendrickson and a pass rush, and it's just a Bengals team that's just going to be ticked off in general because of how lousy they were. That's not something you want. And going on the road without your center, to your point, the snap, making calls at the line of scrimmage with pass protection. I mean, these just are not things you want to be dealing with, even in a short-term situation. So you'll hope for the best, and maybe, who knows, maybe one of them will be out there at least on Sunday, or maybe it'll be the best case scenario. But
McCary would be the center, right? I mean, not the left tackle. The real reason I even ask you this is sort of like, who are they going to play with for 60 minutes? Like, if this is the case and both of these guys are down, because I saw McCary out on the left edge, and I'm like, wow, like they deep depth on the offensive line. Dude, that's something we haven't talked about at all. Now it's something we have to talk about.
Well, McCary most likely would play left tackle, and Sam Mustipher they would elevate from the practice squad as they did over the weekend. And Mustipher, started a ton of games for the Bears. He's a Owings Mills native, so kind of a good story. But it also proved out in Chicago he's best served as a backup. And I think that was evident over his 3 years starting games for the Bears. I mean, that's why he was available when the Ravens signed him in the offseason. So you do feel better about him compared to maybe most teams' backup centers. But again, there's a reason why you took Tyler Linderbaum in the first round. I always say this, and it's such a fan reaction at this point, not just, and I'm not saying Ravens fans, I think anywhere, that you just say, okay, next man up. Well, you can only say that so many times until you look at the depth chart and say, "Ooh, I don't know if that looks good." So again, if Stanley and Linderbaum aren't out very long, then you can weather this. But at the same time, you look at the schedule at Cincinnati. All right, home against Indianapolis, kind of a similar story to what we were talking about with the Texans. But then you have Cleveland and Pittsburgh. So you have three AFC North road games here that you don't want to be in a position where you're so undermanned taking on your division rivals early in the season. So, it's not the panic button, but because you're not going to turtle up. I mean, you got to go out and play, but it's less than ideal, especially when you went to the lengths that the Ravens went to try to keep their starters out of harm's way in the preseason. And to your point, they were sloppy. I mean, they had penalties and the offense just wasn't very crisp. The defense, for as well as they played, they had some big time penalties as well that they had to overcome. So, you're almost willing to sacrifice that because, yeah, you keep everyone healthy, but then defeats the purpose when you lose multiple starters in week one and already one of them for the season and holding your breath on the other guys. So it's less than ideal, but we also understand that whether it's week one, week 8, week 17, you're going to lose some guys over the course of a season. You were just hoping to avoid it happening at such a volume early in the season that kind of gives you that feeling almost like 2 years ago, almost like a here we go again scenario. But again, you hope, you pray, you keep your fingers crossed, whatever you want to do, that these other injuries aren't as severe. But I mean, it really does put a damper on what was a win and a game that the Ravens should feel fine about overall relative to what you see around the league. I mean, Kevin Zeitler, I asked him about it in the post-game locker room, and he just said, look, man, I've been around a long time. The week one's kind of like the Wild West. I mean, you just don't really know what you're going to get. I mean, sometimes you come out looking great, or your opponent comes out looking horrible, or your opponent surprises you.
Well, in the world of the John Harbaugh paranoia and all of these head coaches' paranoia, week one is the thing they're all sleight of hand, right? They don't show anything in the preseason. They throw you guys off the backfields. They don't practice. I mean, Harbaugh's over there worrying about practicing stuff in front of fans, right? Like the stuff that they do in early August, they don't want anybody. I mean, it's paranoia, the destroyer. And then they come out and they onside a kick in Denver where, all of a sudden they try to make a play on the kickoff of the season to give you that element of surprise. Everything about week one is the element of surprise in the mind of all of these head coaches.
It is. And it's also the element of overreaction for everyone else. And that's where we look at this and say, oh, okay, again, the Ravens won. It wasn't pretty. They need to be better. They know that. I mean, I don't think I encountered a single offensive player in the post-game locker room that was remotely satisfied with what they did. I mean, Zay Flowers kind of had that rookie, he was kind of not in awe of the moment, but I think he was on cloud nine because, hey, he had a good game and it was his first NFL game and good for him. He should feel good about that. But, from Lamar Jackson to Kevin Zeitler to Odell Beckham Jr., I mean, no one was particularly happy with how they played. I mean, that was just the way it worked. And, that I think some of that was to be expected, especially when you're not playing in the preseason. I think there was going to be that adjustment. There's going to be a learning curve when you're talking about a new offense. And by the way, you didn't have Mark Andrews out there. And I think that was evident by how little the Ravens got going over the middle of the field. A reminder of all these wide receivers are great and they're better for that. And I think they have a higher ceiling, but still reminds you just how important, how critical Mark Andrews is to that whole operation. But they're going to get him back. That he missed week one. They erred on the side of caution. You're trying to do that. But again, when you lose upside that they lost with J.K. Dobbins, it's just you take that long-term hit and you hope that Justice Hill can help pick up the slack. Certainly,
Why
Gus
did you love
Edwards.
him so much? I mean, you talked a lot about. I don't know that we had a segment where you didn't talk about him because we were talking about Dobbins not playing, holding out. Dobbins was in the news. Dobbins was talking. Dobbins wasn't there. Where's Dobbins? Is he going to play? Is he going to show up? That's for Josh Jacobs, for all those running backs a couple weeks ago. But you kept saying Justice Hill, and there he is. Here he is. What do we need to know about him in regard to maybe what we didn't know the last couple of years of seeing him?
I mean, I think the difference now, Nestor, is I think his skill set, I mean, he's more of a space player, right? He's certainly not a guy that profiles as, oh, he's going to run between the tackles a ton. Like Gus Edwards, for example, who obviously Gus is going to have a bigger role than I was kind of wondering what his role was going to be like, as this offense. But Justice Hill's just a better fit for what Todd Monken wants out of his running backs. And it's not so much even running the ball, it's receiving out of the backfield. He's probably of the Ravens running backs, and I'm not sure about this, but I think he might be their best in pass protection. And certainly that's a factor as we saw the O-line have its issues, especially in that first half, protecting Lamar Jackson and dealing with blitzes. I think that's why we saw Patrick Ricard out on the field probably more than anyone thought.
I was just getting ready to say, what was he doing out there? Every time I looked up, he's off the left side, chipping a linebacker or trying to take on a safety. And I'm like, I thought he was the forgotten man. And it was really weird watching Lamar back up and then have somebody get in on him and him not have the escapability because of the space and the direction he's moving in, right? Like literally, it was just a bizarre thing to see this offense a little bit because it's not anything like we saw. We thought it was bizarre when they were out there running, metallic players in different directions, wave left, wave right and all that. This certainly looks a little bit different, but it looks like Lamar's a little more susceptible to getting chased around and getting pinched, getting stuck. And I didn't think Lamar could get stuck.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not as, I mean, go back and look how many times he was sacked a couple years ago. I mean, it has happened, and at times has happened at high volume. And we saw this 2 years ago when Alejandro Villanueva was playing left tackle, and I mean, they weren't very good on the offensive line. I mean, talk about losing J.K. Dobbins 2 years ago. Their O-line was their biggest problem as it pertained to the entire operation. So, but with to go back to it, Justice Hill probably the best fit from a scheme standpoint. I think you're going to see. I'm not ready to say that he'll be the lead back. I'm not saying that at all, but I do think looking at him and Gus Edwards, it'll probably be not probably. I'd be confident in saying it'll be far more 1 and 1A than it would have been under Greg Roman, right? Because under Greg Roman, Gus Edwards would have just become the guy basically because they didn't throw to their backs anyway.
Lamar would have run the ball 18 times in Cincinnati, and they try to figure out a way to win. And they still might do that. They still might do that because they didn't do that this week.
Yeah, let's be clear. Let's be clear about this. And I even noted this in what I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, and that was part of my, part of the lamenting the loss of Dobbins is the upside in the running game, and part of that is I think the Ravens have made it very evident now. Go back and look at how many times Lamar Jackson ran in 2019 week 1, 2020 week 1. You'll find that in week 1, he quite often has not run a whole lot. So that, again, perspective, don't overreact to week 1 and say, because we saw this in the opener, this is how it's going to be. But I think it's no secret that the Ravens, John Harbaugh even said this last Friday, it's a fair assumption that they're going to throw the ball more than they have in the past. And that didn't really play out on Sunday, but that's still the expectation. But I think what was interesting, Lamar Jackson ran the ball 6 times. Nestor, 5 of those were scrambles. He had 1 design run. It was a QB sneak in the first quarter, late in the first quarter. So that was a far cry from what we saw under Greg Roman most of the time, most Sundays. And again, not even saying Lamar running 22 times, but of the 10 or 11 times he'd run, a good portion of those would be design runs. So if you are going to continue to avoid design runs to that degree, yeah, you are losing quite a bit in upside with your running game if you're not going to have J.K. Dobbins and you're not going to have Lamar Jackson other than the scrambling, which, let's face it, I mean, he led them in rushing still, which was very much a case of, product of the offensive line and pass protection, but he's still going to be a factor. But again, if it's not the designed runs and you're losing J.K. Dobbins, I mean, boy, you're cutting off a lot of upside right off the top.
I don't have to go to the locker room anymore and face him, but he is their best running back.
Yeah, he's the greatest rushing quarterback in NFL history. I mean, it's already bearing out, right? I mean, okay, I don't want to disrespect Michael Vick. I don't want to disrespect Randall Cunningham, but look at the numbers. Look at what he's done.
I saw his contract too.
He led them in rushing the last 4 years. I mean, even the last 2 years when he missed the final 5 games, he still led them in rushing. So it points to that, but it's a lot of upside that you're having to replace here because J.K. Dobbins, we saw it even last year when he wasn't completely right, what kind of home run hitter he can be and his ability to make guys miss. And that's why I said it was so good to see Zay Flowers. He's not the same player, of course, and he's not going to run the ball 20 times a game, but you saw that same that yak ability, that ability to make guys miss and make them look silly. I mean, we saw, Dobbins has been able to do that when he's been healthy. Unfortunately, it's all too fleeting, but you miss that. You're going to have to find that over the course of the season. And that's not going to say it's going to be one guy, but you're going to have to make up for that. So it is going to be interesting with the loss of Dobbins to see what this looks like. And again, Justice Hill, Gus Edwards stepping up. I'm guessing we'll see Melvin Gordon promoted from the practice squad. I mean, I didn't think he had a great summer, but he didn't have a bad summer either. I mean, he's not the guy that he was as a Pro Bowl running back for the Chargers several years ago, but I think he can still help them. And we'll even see about Keaton Mitchell, the undrafted rookie, Anthony Mitchell's son, who made the team, but they put him on IR because he's got a shoulder. I don't think that's supposed to be a season-ending thing, so we'll see if he's in the mix later this year. Maybe he's that guy that becomes their home run hitter come week 13. Who knows? But it's a question that you're going to have to find an answer that you thought you had, right? I mean, you thought J.K. Dobbins was going to run for, I don't know, 1,200 yards this year. I certainly would not have been surprised had that been the case, because I think they were planning on him being the guy and it being a little bit less of a timeshare than it's been in the past when Greg Roman was in charge of the offense.
And it takes pressure off of Lamar to pass and to not run, even though when he runs, they win.
I mean, and this is what I've said to you all along. I mean, the plan has never been that Lamar's just going to sit back there and throw 45 times either. They're just going to be more balanced, and they want to be more explosive in the passing game. And certainly, yeah, they do plan to throw more, but you still want to have balance. You still have games where, even though it didn't play out Sunday, but there was rain in the forecast. There are going to be games where there's going to be wind, and you're not going to be able to throw the football as much. So you want to be able to be multiple. And I think the good news is, with the wide receiver talent they've added, that you certainly feel better about their situation now than if this had happened to J.K., like when this happened to J.K. Dobbins 2 years ago, and you had Hollywood Brown and Rashad Bateman, who was injured at the time already, and you're looking at your wide receivers and saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So you at least have that, and that's why, I haven't changed my stance drastically on where the Ravens are or where I think they're going to be. I mean, I picked them to go 11-6 and be a wild card. I still feel I'm not changing that prediction after losing Dobbins, but when you get to January, when you're talking about upside, when you're thinking about all the things you want to be able to do at a high level to beat teams in the playoffs and make a deep run, you certainly were envisioning J.K. Dobbins being a big part of doing that. And now that he's not going to be, again, it comes back to, are you going to be able to find some more upside elsewhere? Whether it is one of these running backs surprising you, or whether it is Zay Flowers doing things that he did on Sunday, which again, I was very impressed with what we saw from him. So that was easily, that was easily the highlight offensively, but they've got to be better. There's no question about that. But in the meantime, you're holding your breath to get some good news on Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Linderbaum.
We're going to have plenty on the defense. We'll have plenty. We'll even talk about Justin Tucker kicking field goals and drinking Rofo and doing all that. Speaking of that, Royal Farms in our cup, getting ready. Kids are in school, right? It's 9/11 this week, so thoughts about all that. My wife was a first responder up there a long time ago, so I want to salute everybody out there that's thinking about that. It's 22 years, crazy. We got football this week. We got baseball this week. The Orioles have a sold-out game on Friday this week with the Adam Jones thing. I'm writing letters to Steve Bisciotti and letters to John Harbaugh. So I haven't even read the letters for the radio side of it yet. I'll do that a little later on in the week. You can find us around all week long, and, of course, at Fadley's on Friday doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, presented by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Jiffy Lube, new sponsor, as well as our friends at Window Nation, 866-90-NATION. He is Luke. You can find him at the ballpark this week. You can find him in Owings Mills during the week. He's doing double duty. I'm locked out. He's working harder. He's aging more rapidly than I. But I'll be here doing radio all week as well. We have Mike Lombardi on this week. We have some great guests talking football this week as well, as the Ravens go out to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals, who lost to the Browns, and that's probably the best news of week one. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We're back for more Ravens coverage around here, as well as Orioles coverage. Imagine that in September. We're WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore. Positive.